All right, so today's lesson is going to be a little bit shorter because we had the 7-minute review of the topics and the assignments that we covered at the end of the week last week. But for today and tomorrow, our driving question is, what visual representations do we use to understand different types of matter? And our objective is to identify the different models used for representing matter. So, a little funny story before we get started. I tried to name this slideshow in Google Slides. I tried to name it Atomic Models. And when I tried to open it, the school computer blocked me from opening it because it used the word models and it thought I was talking about supermodels. So, if you're ever creating a document for science class, keep the word models out of it because the school computer will block you because it thinks you're talking about supermodels. So, fun story. Moving on to today's topic, which is much more interesting, atomic models and the different representations that we've seen so far in the assignments you've been submitting. And the reason that I'm addressing these now is because these came up in Thursday and Friday's assignments. I saw a lot of people copy and pasting different images and different representations of atoms and compounds and things like that. So I think it's important that we know the difference between the two. So the first one we're going to look at on the left here is our building block of all matter. This is an atom of sodium. And we know sodium is an element, and the atom is the simplest form of that element. In the middle, we know that there is the nucleus, which contains the protons and the neutrons. And then surrounding the nucleus, we have the electron shells with the electrons in them. We know from the information on the periodic table that we can determine exactly how many protons, neutrons, and electrons are in an atom of sodium. And so we can draw a visual representation of that atom. Now, this next representation, this is also table salt. So this was one that I saw, I think, on someone who had chosen table salt as their compound example from last week's assignment. And this, I'm not sure if this type of model we'll be getting into this week just yet, but I wanted to include it because I had seen it on a few different documents that were submitted last week. But this is a representation of table salt as a compound. So you'll notice that it's not just containing sodium. The lines and the different branches represent how these atoms are connected with one another, which is what we're going to be getting into this week with valence electrons and how electrons interact in compounds and things like that. But again, this model is probably a bit more in depth than the other ones that we'll be looking at. Now, the last model all the way to the right here, this is what we call a ball and stick model. And that's what we're going to be looking at probably later this week in IXL. But let's just say in this example that this is table salt, or it's NaCl, right? Sodium and chlorine. So if that's the case, then we know that the one color represents one atom and the other color represents the atom of the other element. And then the lines are the way that they're connected via their electrons. Remember, the electrons on the outer shell, they want to be full. And that's how they connect with other elements and other element atoms. So let's say this green one is sodium, and then the blue one is chlorine. They're connected through their electrons, and that is represented by the stick, which is what we're going to be looking at later in the IXL. Now, an important thing to keep in mind when we're moving on to the ball and stick models is that NaCl, that it deals with proportions. Think back to the H2O example. There always has to be 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. So if that were the case, let's pretend we're doing a ball and stick model for H2O. There should be twice as many hydrogen atoms in that model as there are oxygen. And we'll see that later on this week. Today's Ed Puzzle, which is going to be the assignment that is graded for participation, is going to be, for the most part, a review of topics you've covered with Mrs. Bennett. But look in today's Schoology folder and click the link. Make sure you're answering all of the questions so that I can give you full credit. And if you have any questions, please let me know.